English, which is currently playing at the Todd Hames Theater in New York, is definitely a must-see play featuring a very different immigrant story beyond what we usually see from the headlines. So, to summarize the play, in a class in Iran in the year 2008, Marjan is preparing her 4 students for the TOEFL, or rather, test of English as a foreign language. Goli, Alam, Roya, and Omid each have their own reasoning to pass the exam, whether it's to relocate for school or travel. But over the weeks the play takes place, as things evolve from preparing for a test to confronting the need to learn English, leave one's own country, and perhaps abandon or lose oneself to another culture, conflicts arise that Marjan may not have been expecting, and it could potentially get in the way of her students' progress or even passing the test. So get into the review section. The first highlight we have to talk about is how the play handles showing when the characters are speaking Farsi and when they're speaking English as a second language. And the main way they do this is when they're speaking Farsi, they're speaking clearly, fast, they're not kind of stuttering or kind of having to process what they're trying to say. And then when they're speaking English as a second language, that's when you get kind of the accents, that's when you get the sort of trouble to get the words and thoughts out, and it makes for a good technique to show when they're speaking to each other in their mother's tongue and when they're speaking in a foreign tongue. Which leads to the second highlight, which is how just that alone starts to inform you about the immigrant experience. And one of the things that kind of triggered this idea was in Modern Family years ago, Gloria was talking to her husband and kid about how she sounds so much smarter in English, or how she doesn't have an accent back home, and how it's so much better because back home she can talk in her own tongue and doesn't have all these issues that lead to these negative perceptions. And when it comes to the character of Elham, in class, Elham is maybe the second out of the 4 who are doing well, with Omid damn near coming off as a native speaker. And because Alham is someone who is competitive, a little bit mean-spirited, and, is very frustrated by this man's progress compared to hers, especially because she has so much writing on passing this test, you see her have to kind of reinforce that despite my struggles in this class, I am actually smart. She talks about this paper that she's working on a research in terms of gastronomy. That's the reason why she needs to take this class, that needs to pass this test, and then go off to Melbourne in order to study, and hopefully eventually end up back in Iran once she has the doctoral degree so that she can be accredited, recognized when she does produce work. And it's a whole thing. But the point is, when you're hearing her talk about everything and try to kind of counterbalance the idea that because I have this accent, because I struggle speaking English, it doesn't mean I'm done. It means I'm struggling to try to translate these thoughts and feelings that are in my head into a language which, as they note multiple times, it's very much cold and has these weird sayings that don't make a lot of sense, especially because there's a push to understand that language isn't just about the words, but also the culture attached to it. Like, hold your horses is one of the things that is used in the promo for this, and they're like, what does that even mean? Especially to other cultures. And I would even add in, when it comes to the immigrant experience, one of the things that not only Elham but Roya, who is someone who is in the process of possibly immigrating to Canada, what she pushes is the idea that when it comes to immigration, as shown with Elham, is not something that is you get happy about and really get joyous. It's a moment to grieve, because the only real reason to immigrate like Elham has to is because you don't necessarily have a choice. For Elham, if she wants to be in a university that has the tools and things she needs, she has to go to Melbourne. When it comes to Roya, her son and her granddaughter's in Canada. She needs to learn English so that she doesn't have to feel like a burden and is reliant on them. But with her situation, it's much more challenging, because with Elham, she's going for education and she come back. Roya's going to Canada because not only of the distance between her and her son, but also because her son is kind of severing the relationship between them. Yes, he did get her an iPhone, which allows him to communicate, but with him deciding to cut off his daughter from learning Farsi, from her being very much a Canadian instead of an Iranian Canadian. You see him not only making his daughter into a Canadian person, but also kind of, at least for Roya, maybe feeling like he is cutting away from all the things that she embedded in her son. And with that, you see a mixed feeling between this child who left for possibly better opportunities, but at the same time is, I wouldn't say he's damning his upbringing in Iran, but definitely presenting the idea that it's not good enough, that it doesn't have what is valuable enough to, as Roya did for her son, to pass that down, all this history, culture, richness to his daughter. And again, it pushes that idea that immigration is for grieving, because it's not just for the individual, but everybody involved that loses something. I mean, nations lose their smartest and brightest when someone immigrates, but also the family loses potential breadwinners. They lose cousins, brothers, sisters, sons in this case. And then on top of that, the next generation who may not have the same connections, if they ever get one at all. And I feel like what Roy was going through is perhaps one of the most notable bits of you getting to understand why a lot of people who come to various countries that aren't their homeland and they may have an attitude or something like that, is because if they really had the choice, they probably wouldn't have come here. But unfortunately, what they need as people, be it safety, opportunity, what have you, they couldn't have that at home. So they found their way to your country. Like Elham, don't really want to be there, wish history was different so that their country would have been the one that dominated the world, that you would have to speak their tongue so that they don't have to adjust to you and your culture, but here they are. But let me be clear, even though there's a lot of potential frustration that comes out of these characters, and even some sadness and drama, that doesn't mean that this is one of those sad, dreary type of shows. When it comes to Elham and Roya, they definitely bring the jokes. And then when it comes to Marjan, you get to see a side of Elham that is definitely, you may not like it as a teacher, but as somebody watching or a peer, you'll be somewhere between laughing to kind of shocked, but still want to be very much, observant of the situation. For there's layers to this. On one hand, it's funny to watch Elham go against Omid, who's her main competition, kind of poke at Marjan because she makes it seem that her time in Manchester for 9 years was so beautiful. But at the same time, it also pushes and pulls from that. For while the push is, why did you like it? If you liked it so much, why did you come back to Iran? On the other end, you have Marjan noting that she had to change her name because people couldn't say it properly. You have to note that it took her, of the 9 years she was there, 2 years to get acclimated to the point of feeling some kind of comfortable, and even then being a bit tired when she had to still, fit in with the culture. And in many ways, throughout this back and forth, there are, of course, jokes about it, maybe laugh to keep from crying kind of jokes, but nonetheless, you get a further sense that as much as people like Marjan can come back, as Elham says they want to, there is sort of this otherness that develops as you spend more and more time in a foreign place, then come back home, and while you still can speak your mother's tongue, at the same time you're still forever changed because you learned a different language, because you had to sometimes lessen pieces of yourself, modify pieces of yourself in order to get by. And it really shows, in some ways, not only the immigrant experience, but the experience of being anything other than white and speaking native English has it where you have to code switch, you have to modify yourself, and maybe either sometimes die a little bit inside or other things in order to find some way to survive. Which is a bit dark, but I feel like this play, depending on how you look at it, what your experiences are, yes, it has its jovial moments in comedy, even some awkward moments that can't go into because too much in the spoiler round, but it has a little bit of everything from jovial highs to the type of things that if you have immigrants in your family, you are an immigrant, or even some type of connection to kind of feeling other than society, it's going to click with you in a way that, again, may make you laugh sometimes, other times could possibly draw tears to your eyes. Now, with all that said, there is a bit of an on-the-fence thing for us, and that's just that, for one, the set is on a swivel, so with the whole classroom where you watch everything happen, it turns all the way around. So there are times when you may feel like if you're on the extremes, like I was on the far right, you may get the sense that you're missing something, especially as the classroom has it where the board is more so facing the left side than it's facing your side. So, for example, when Marjan is starting to get a lot of conflicts in class, especially in terms of forcing these characters to speak English, he starts marking on the board, writes the names of and everything. And because of the angle, sometimes you may not see her do it to know that the situation has gotten serious. But perhaps the major issue most people will have is that when it comes to one character and the conflicts they go through, it doesn't necessarily get resolved. So with that, their storyline kind of ends on an ellipsis in a way that if you're somebody who likes endings for plays, movies, shows, what have you, to be definitive, you're going to get a little bit peeved. But overall, when it comes to English, being that this is the first play we've seen this year, the standard has not been set high. For far from being a different take on the immigrant experience, especially the prepping side, these characters have the ability to stay with you, and even I would say you may find yourself referencing them long after English ends its Broadway run, I believe, on March 2nd. For what the cast and creators behind English made is something I generally hope doesn't just end up like most stage productions where if you don't see it, you're SOL. For what it gives, I feel is kind of that missing piece in terms of understanding what people who migrate to various countries go through. For often, it's the pushing of people coming from nothing and then they made something out of themselves. Not the whole preparation that goes involved, especially for non-refugee immigrants who have to mentally prep for the idea that they have to leave their home country. They have to learn a different language. They who, if you've been paying attention, a lot of them were doctors, scientists, and other things like that. And then because their accreditation is not recognized, either in the UK, Americas, whatever, now they have to basically start all over again. Despite having this vast knowledge, but because this vast knowledge is not recognized, never mind they can't potentially explain it in English, now they have to do jobs which they would never do if they was back home. And sometimes it's a little bit overwhelming how much perspective it can give you, even if you are familiar with what the experience is of a lot of immigrant families and people. But at the same time, it seems very different when you're watching it on a television show, maybe some interview versus a play where the people feel more tangible, feel a bit more real, and you have to really recognize the individual story, which, whether it's Roya's situation with her son who feels like he's disowning his own people and culture, whether it's Elam's situation in terms of having to go to a different place just because her own country can't support her future endeavors, all of it combined creates something which, I mean, just trying to do justice to the feeling of what the story gives me is making it so I'm acting like I like English isn't my first language. And all I can hope is that with this being, I think they said at the end of the first show, 11 people's Broadway debut, hopefully this isn't the last show all of them do together, never mind as individuals. For this was definitely something far more interesting than a decent amount of stuff that we've seen on and off Broadway.